In today's video, we're going to be covering a very popular no-code builder called Draftbit. So this video is going to be divided into two parts. In the first part, we are going to talk about how Draftbit works. We're going to have a quick overview of all these features and functionality. And then in the second part of the video, we're going to be building a very simple app so that you can see how it works hands-on. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I'm going to be covering in today's video, as well as building, are going to be available to view and or clone from my Patreon page. And you can learn more about our amazing Patreon community using the link just below the video. All right, so here I am on draftbit.com, and Draftbit claims that you can create any app 10 times faster. With Draftbit, you can build native mobile apps, responsive web apps, and internal tools visually and collaboratively, source code included, so you're never locked in, okay? So it's a very powerful tool with a simple interface. You can design, build, test, and publish all from the same place, okay? So here you have a quick mock-up of the main UI screen, okay? So you can see right away you have a general feel at this point of how the tool works, right? The look and feel of the tool, okay? And we're gonna go deeper into this a little bit later in the video, okay? So here are some templates that you can use as well, right? So break free from templates, build anything you can't imagine. So you can start with any of these pages and go from there. Here you can bring your screens to life, start quickly, customize every detail, preview as you go, connect it up, okay? So here you have your basic flow, get it ready, deploy to web first, test the water, submit for release. That's your normal kind of flow. Now, if you click on features, you're going to learn the features and functionality in more detail so that you have a better understanding of the things that this tool is capable of. Okay, so here you have an emphasis on visual building done right. So if you scroll down, you can see this is the UI screen and some of the components, some of the things that you can build, along with various options and things like that. And so here you have different components or widgets, you can call them that as well. And this is a sample screen, how it looks. You have a design system, you can connect things up, navigations, actions and interactions, state management, and you also can access APIs directly. You can add integrations, and so you have a lot of great features at your disposal that we are gonna have a hands-on session a little bit later in the video. All right, so let me go ahead and log into Draftbit now. I'm using one of their free plans right now. So once you're logged in, you're going to be on the screen that looks something like this. So here I am in my dashboard and I'm seeing my apps. At this point, I only have one app that I was kind of looking at, but I can also switch to a workspace view and I can see my app here. I also have some starter apps that I can start with, essentially templates for all kinds of different niches. So there's an events and ticketing app, a food ordering and delivery app, a medical app for clinics and pharmacies, game live streaming, a dating app, social media app, etc., etc. You also have some example screens. So, you know, if you don't want to use a template of an entire app, you can start with a sample screen here, and then you have a bunch of other options. And so now I'm going to go into my workspace here, and we're going to create a brand new project from scratch. Okay, so I'm going to click on create project, and I'm just going to call it app 1. I'm going to say next. All of these are optional. I'm just going to do next. And here it's asking me, how do you want to start? Choose a starting point. So I'm going to choose blank so that you guys can see how to build an app from scratch. I'm going to click on next, and I'm just going to say I am ready. Okay. All right. So the app is being created here. We're going to wait a few moments. Okay. And the app has been created. Click on let's go. And we have been redirected to the main UI builder screen. And let me explain to you what's happening. So on the left-hand side in this top area right here, you can see all the screens or pages that your app has. Okay, so right now we only have a blank screen here, which is this screen right here. Just below it, you are going to have a little pane that's going to list the various components that your app will have. So right now I don't have any components. Okay, we're going to add components as I'm going to start building the app. And so we can click on this plus icon right here and we can add various components. Okay, so you have basic components, you have buttons, you have a bottom sheet, you have lists and data, form inputs, form controls, media, etc., etc. So pretty much you have a component for every use case that you might want to implement in your app. Okay. In the middle here, we have the canvas, okay, and this is going to be the preview of the app that we are building, okay. So here you can pick a device. So let's say you want to preview it on an iPhone 11, you can do that. You can also preview it on a Pixel 7, in a Nexus 5, etc., etc. Now, on the right-hand side, you have different properties that are going to apply to the component in question. So, for instance, let's say I add a button right here, right? So I just added a button. This is my button right here. Now, this first tab allows me to style the button, right? So I can have a custom style sheet. I can, use various font settings. I can use the color. I can change the background of this button, right? So let's say I want to change it to maybe this kind of background here. And it refreshed it, and now we have a different background. I have borders, I have size, so everything concerning how the button looks, okay? Now, if I click on this next tab here, I have various settings specific to this component, right? So I can rename this component. I have things like active opacity. I can delay a long press, disable the opacity, etc., etc. Okay. Now, in this third tab, you can start to configure how your component looks and behaves. Okay. So you can change the text that you have here that's displayed here. It's get started. I can change it, for instance, to, submit. And now it's going to refresh and it's going to say submit right here. I can also set whether this button is disabled, loading. Next, I have conditional displays. And a lot of these settings can be static or they can be dynamic, meaning that I can set them right now or I can have them change while the app is running. And then last but not least, we have the actions here. Okay, so here you have a trigger, and so I can click here and I can define a specific trigger. So for instance, on press or on long press. So if this button is pressed, I can have it do something. If there's a long press event, I can have it do something as well. And you're gonna see all of that a little bit later in the video. All right, so now that you have a general sense of the UI, namely how to find components, how to place them on the canvas, and configure them as well, let's talk about some of the other important functionality that you need in order to build your app. Now, if you hover over this icon right here, you can see that it says API and Cloud Services. So this allows you to connect your backend and bring in live data from APIs and Cloud Services. So if I click here, I'm going to be shown this screen right here. So you have a couple of options when it comes to connecting your app to a specific backend in order to interface with data. So you can connect it to a custom API, which is just a generic API that, just purely a REST API. Or you can connect it to a service, okay? So you have a list of services here. So for instance, you have Supabase, but the trick here is that, so if you want to connect to Supabase, for instance, you are essentially going to be connecting to a generic REST API service, okay? You're not going to be connecting to Supabase using a specific adapter. So regardless of what service you're going to be picking, so for instance, you want to connect to Bubble, it's still going to be a REST API, just like if you were connecting to REST API here. So it's the same way, except it's kind of categorized different. And so let's say you have some data that can be easily accessed via a REST API. So all you need to do is click here, fill this information out, and you will be able to use that data in your app, as I'm going to show you a little bit later in the video. The next feature that you have is custom code. So you can add custom functions, components, and packages to your app. And the custom code that you're going to be including here is going to be in the form of JavaScript React Native. So unlike with FlutterFlow, where the custom code is going to be Dart/Flutter, here it's going to be JavaScript React Native. Next, we have a screen where you can set variables. Okay, so you can set screen level and app level variables. And so if I click here, I can create and assign various variables. So I have app variables, I have device variables, and I have screen variables. The difference mainly is the scope. So app variables are variables that can be set and utilized across your entire app, whereas device variables are app-wide variables that allow you to store data on your user's devices, and screen variables are variables scoped to a specific screen. So in this case, they're going to be scoped to the screen that I'm on right now, which is this blank screen right here. So essentially, depending on the scope of the variable, whether you need this variable saved on the user's device, or you need to have that variable to be available across the entire app, or if you just want to have it available on a certain page, you're going to pick the specific type of variable that you want to create and store. Next, you can configure theme and styles for your app. So you can set colors and style sheets for the app. So here you can set various colors that you're going to be using throughout your app, and you can also set various style sheets. So a style sheet is a set of style properties used to control the layout and design of a screen or a component. And so a style sheet essentially gives your app a certain look and feel. And last but not least, you have an area where you can add assets to your app. So upload and manage your static assets and media files. And so if you click here, you can upload various files to your app, whether they're media files, images, etc., etc. All right, so now that we've had a general overview of Draftbit, let's go ahead and put this knowledge to use and try to build a very, very simple app. Now, the app that we're going to be building is going to be a simple to-do app. And so what we're going to have is a user is going to have a list of tasks that they can check off, and those tasks are going to appear somewhere else. They can also create new tasks, and they can delete tasks as well. Now, because Draftbit needs to access external data via an API, I actually employed the use of a tool called Mock API to create a simple fake API for me. And so I created one endpoint called tasks, and I generated 5 random tasks. And if I click on data, you can see that this is a list of my 5 tasks. Each task has 3 fields: task, done, and the ID. Task is the name of the task. Done is a Boolean, meaning true or false, whether that task was done or not. And then we have an ID for each of the tasks, which is a simple number to uniquely identify a specific task. Now, after you have your API endpoint, you want to configure it in your app. So we're going to go back to our app. We're going to go to API and Cloud Services. We're going to click on REST API, and we're going to configure our REST API endpoint. So I'm going to call this to-do API. The base URL, I'm going to just copy all of this, copy this right here. Everything else I'm going to leave on default, so I'm going to click on Save. Next, I need to create my endpoints. And what is an endpoint? Well, an endpoint is a specific operation that your app is going to perform as a result of some user action. So things like listing to-do items, updating a to-do item, creating a new to-do item, deleting a to-do item, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and create the new endpoint that's going to list to-do items. And so I'm going to say list to-dos. This is going to have a get request. Next, for the role, we're going to select get many, and this essentially lets Draftbit know what this endpoint is going to be doing so that it can be used correctly inside of an app. For the object type, we don't have any objects. I'm just going to say to do, press enter. Next, we're going to click on paths and parameters. Now, for the paths and parameter, we need to know the path of that specific endpoint. And if you go to Mock API and you click on tasks here, you can see that when you click on tasks, you get an output of all of your tasks. And this task right here is the path for this specific endpoint. So I'm going to copy this, go back here and paste it in here, okay? We're going to click on headers. We're going to leave these on defaults. These are fine. And last but not least, we're going to go to test, and we need to click on test. So if we click on test, we get the result and it says 200 okay. And it's important to test because when you test, you can click on save, and that way Draftbit can parse all of this and it will understand what kind of data to expect when you're going to be using these API calls inside of your app. So this is a really, really nice feature, and it reminds me of Bubble. Bubble has a very, very similar functionality. So we're going to click on save, and now we have one endpoint called list to-dos, and that essentially lists our to-dos. So with this one endpoint, we can start building the app. So I'm going to delete this submit button here, click here, delete it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a simple list view that's going to list the items that we have in our database. And for that, I'm going to click here and I'm going to type list. And I'm going to select a simple list. So I'm going to select this very, very simple list. And now we have this list. I'm going to select this list. And I'm going to go back to my component and I'm going to select text. Okay, so I can select this text. And this text is going to be inside of the list. And so depending on how many items we have, this is going to be repeatable. Now, this list right here needs to be connected to that API endpoint that's going to list the actual items. And the way that you do it in Draftbit is that you need to create a parent that's going to actually get the data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top level, click here and type fetch. Okay, so you need fetch to be as a parent of a list that you're going to be showing and getting the data from. So I'm going to click on fetch right here, and I have this fetch, drag and drop it to blank, and then put this as the child. Okay, so fetch is now the parent of list, and now I can configure what exactly we're going to be fetching. So we're going to select fetch, go to service, select to-do API over here, and right away we have a preview. So this is a really, really nice feature, because in FlutterFlow, you have to go on another screen, test out your data, and this right here you're seeing right away. It's kind of in line, right? So once you pick it, you can see it right here. So this looks good. We're getting the data that we need. It looks perfect. And so now we can go to list right here and we can configure it, right? So it says here data. I'm going to click on data. And right here, we have a suggestion, right? There's so many things that you can configure it with, but it has hidden the other non-relevant options. Okay, so it's telling me that I need to select a top level response. I'm going to select my top level response, and I can also give it a unique key. So I can select this and I can select my ID, and note it knows the items, right? So I don't need to do a JSON path. I don't need to do anything. It knows the items that it has gotten back in that JSON call. And that is when we did that test, when we configured that endpoint, we did that test and it parsed the data. And it now knows it. It knows the type. It knows everything, which is really, really nice. So we're going to select ID for this unique key right here, which is a nice thing to do when you have a field that's going to be unique across all of the items in that list. Okay. Next, we're going to go into text, and now we can configure the text as well. So let's say we want to display the actual name of the task there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter a variable here called task. Click out, and then I can configure this variable. Okay, so I entered this variable declaratively, and now it's telling me, okay, what is this variable about? What is it linked to? Okay, so now we have this variable here called task, and I can actually find this variable. So if I scroll down, we have these fields here, right? We have done, ID, and task. I'm going to select task here, and now it automatically displayed all the tasks. And so if I click out, you can see that it's essentially displaying the real-time values from the API call. We have 5 tasks, and these are the name of the tasks. So this is awesome. It's displaying the task right away. We don't need to compile the app. We don't need to do anything. It's all real time. So as you can see, it's actually showing us the raw data from the API call, but it's also showing us the task right here. Now, what I want to do here is I don't want to just display the name of the task. I also want to display a checkbox so that, it can display whether that task is done or not. So whether it's checked or not. And then if the user clicks on the checkbox, it's going to set it as done. Okay. And so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be displaying the name of the task, and then we're going to be displaying a checkbox. And so you want to select list, click on this plus, and then you want to search for checkbox, right? So we're going to select checkbox right here. And now, as you can see, we're seeing a checkbox here. Now, the problem is this checkbox is below the task. We actually want them to be on the same line, on the same row, essentially. And in order to do that, what you want to do is you want to select list, click on this, and you want to search for view, okay? Once you find view, you can select view. And what view allows you to do is that it allows you to display various components aligned in a certain way. So let me show you. So I'm going to put this view right under the list, so as a child of list. And then I'm going to make these items children of view. So I'm going to drag and drop this under view. And the same thing for this under view, except I want checkbox to be first. And now, as you can see, we have a view, text, and a checkbox. The problem is they're still on separate lines. Well, that's easy to fix. Just select view, come over here to this pane over here, and you want to change direction from column to row. So once you select row, they're going to be on the same row right here. So as you can see, now it's on the same row. But I can do more. I can click on view, I can click over here, and I can space them around. And now, as you can see, there's more space between them, right? Now I can also click here, space between, if I wanted to, and that's going to change it right there. And that kind of looks more or less to what we want. Now, if you've been building apps with FlutterFlow, you will immediately recognize this functionality as very, very similar to FlutterFlow, except this column and this row in FlutterFlow are separate layout widgets. So in FlutterFlow, you have column and row, whereas here you just have a view and you can just specify it whether you want it to behave as a column or as a row, okay? So at this point, we have a list view with the task being displayed, but the checkboxes are not being displayed correctly. And so what we want to do is we want to select this checkbox, go to this third tab right here, and we can set an initial value for it. So I'm going to click here, scroll all the way down, and we can set it to done. Okay, so once we set it to done, you can see at this point that we have 4 tasks that are done, and the 5th task is not done. And if we go back to our mock API over here, click on data, you can see that, you know, these 4 tasks done is true, but for the 5th task, done is false, which is exactly what we are seeing here. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to have an ability to click on the checkbox, and I wanted to update the data in the backend. And so if I click on this 5th task, I want to update the 5th task in the backend to complete. And how do we do that? Well, we click on checkbox over here, and you want to create an action, right? So we're going to click here. You want to create the trigger here. The trigger is unchecked. So if we check it, we want to have a certain event. In this case, we're going to do an API request, and we're going to select our service to do API. Unfortunately, we don't have a specific endpoint that we need to execute because the endpoint that we need is an update endpoint. But fortunately, we can just click on new endpoint over here, and we can easily create this new endpoint. So I'm going to say update to do. And in this case, the method is going to be either put or patch. So you can select either one. I'm going to select put. The role is going to be update. Okay. The object type is to do. We already have the object type. Now for the paths and parameters, you need to specify the path of the endpoint. So it's going to be task. And then you want to specify the ID. And here it's telling us use the variable format to create variables which can be filled in at app runtime. Now, when we create this ID, it automatically creates this path test values right here for the ID, but we need to enter a sample value for testing. And so if I take a look at my data here from the mock API, we have a task here with an ID of 5. So I'm going to click here, I'm going to enter 5, and that way I can do some tests as related to that specific task. Okay, we're going to go into body, and now for the body we need key value pairs that we are going to be updating. And so I'm going to say done, and done is going to be true because when you click on the checkbox, we want done to be set to true over here. Okay, so next is headers, and for headers you can just leave them as is. We're going to go to test, and let's see if testing works. Click on task, and we get a 200. Okay, task 5 done is true, ID is 5. And if we go back to our mock API, click over here, click on data, everything is now true. So as you saw, our testing works, and that means we can click save, and we can use that inside of our app. Click on done over here. Now, if you've noticed, back in the UI builder, our screen automatically updated, right? So now all of the tasks are done, okay? And so in order to test this, I'm going to go back to our data and set all of these to false, okay? And that way we can see if that functionality works. I'm going to set all of these to false, update it, go back to our app, and it has refreshed with all of these checkboxes unchecked. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to select this checkbox and configure the right endpoint. So we're going to select update to do over here, and it needs the ID, okay? So obviously we don't want it to be set to 5. We want it to be chose dynamically. So we're going to select ID from this list, okay? So now it's going to be set to the correct ID depending on which checkbox we click on, okay? And so now that we've attached a trigger to this checkbox, we can actually test whether it's working or not. So I'm going to click on this checkbox over here. It's checked here. Go back to mock API, click on data. And as you can see, now it's true while everything else is false. So for instance, if let's say I want to set task 5 to true, I can go back here, click on this, go back here, click on data, and now this last task is also set to true as well as the first one, while the others are still set to false. So now you know that this functionality works perfectly. And it's also a big advantage that you can start testing immediately. You do not need to compile the app, wait for the app to be finished compiling. You can simply load up your UI screen here and start testing your app, which is really, really nice. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to add a feature that allows users to add new to-do lists. So we're going to create a little inline form to do just that. I'm going to go to the top level element right here, and I'm going to add another view here, put it right there. And then inside the view, I'm going to add an input field here. So text input, and I'm also going to add a button. Okay. And so now we have a view with a text input and a button. And as was the case before, each of these fields is in its own row, right? In its own line, so to speak. So we're going to choose view, go back here and set direction to row. And now they're going to be on the same line here. And I can choose view and I can kind of space it out. So maybe justify, yeah, that looks kind of cool. And I can also add some bottom padding to this view as well. Here you have margins and padding. So I can click on this area right here and I give it a little bit of padding. So something like 40 maybe. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Maybe give it some top padding as well, maybe 30. All right, so that looks good. The next thing we need to do is we need to configure an endpoint for creating new task items. So we're going to select this button right here, go to this third tab here. First, change the button text to add task. Next, we want to click here and we want to add a trigger. Okay, so on press, we're going to add an action, API request. We're going to select to do API, and we only have list to do's and update to do. We need to create a new endpoint. This new endpoint is going to be create to do. And for the method, you want to select post. The role is going to be create. That is already selected. Object type is going to be to do. For the paths and parameters, you're going to have tasks. Now for the body, you want to send key value pairs of all the values that you want to have created as part of that new to-do task. So we're going to go back here, take a look at the format. In fact, you can just copy this right here, paste it here, and you want to change the values with variables. So this is going to be a task here. This is going to be false. You can remove ID here because it's going to create ID for it automatically. Next, we're going to add a test value for the task. So I'm just going to call it test task so that we know that was created as a result of testing. We're going to go into headers, leave them on defaults, test. All right, let's go ahead and see if it works. We're going to click on test, 201 created, and we have a new task, done as false. And as you can see, ID is automatically incremented from that last ID that was in the system before, which was 5. So now it's 6. If we go back to our data, click over here, refresh this data, we should see this new task that was created. So now that we have this new endpoint, click on save. We have 3 endpoints right here, list to do's, update to do, create to do, click on done. And now we can wire up this button to that new endpoint. So select this button right here, go to the fourth tab, click on endpoint, choose create to do. Next, we need to configure this specific trigger here, and specifically we need to configure the name of the task that we want to create. And so it's defaulting to the value that we entered for testing. Obviously, we want to have a value that's going to be taken from here, but we don't have a variable for this. So we want to go back to text input. And what we want to do is we want to create a new variable here. And so if you select text input, go to this configuration area here, you will see that data source is using this text input value screen variable. And if you go to your variables over here, you can see that we already have this screen variable here, text input value. And this is going to be the value that the user is going to be entering for the task name. And so now you can go to your button over here and you can correctly wire up the value that was entered here to our API call that this button is going to be doing. So we're going to click back here. And for the task, what you want to do is you want to search for text input value. Okay. And this is going to be the value that the user enters over here. And in fact, you can even change that. So if we come over here, you can come over here and you can change what it says, right? So here it says placeholder. You can change that to enter a task. Okay. So if you do that, that's going to change to enter a task over here because you have a placeholder. And remember, all of these fields can use either static values, you know, the values that you type right now, or some kind of a variable if you want. It's all very, very easy to do. Okay. And so now we have everything working. And as you can see, it's also displaying this test task as well. So let's go ahead and see if we can create a new task here. So this is going to be new task, add task. And when we do that, it's showing up immediately. So this is really nice. It's this immediate feedback. Okay, so once I wired everything up, I can create a new task. And as you can see, it's not set to done. So it's not complete. And if I click here, now it's automatically set to done. If we go and if we take a look at our data over here, you can see we have new task is set to done is set to true. And so as you can see, everything is working perfectly. Next, let's go ahead and create functionality to delete a task. So I'm going to select view, click here, type icon, and we want to select icon button right here. Okay. Now we have an icon button added, and this is the icon that's appearing right here. Now, if you click on icon button, you can actually configure it, right? So if you click on here, you can click here and type, let's say, delete, choose this, and now your icon has this nice delete icon right here. Now, obviously, in your production app, you may want to spend some more time designing this. Maybe you want to make sure that these are together, but for this little demo, this is going to suffice. And so next, what you want to do is you want to select your icon button, click on this, create a new trigger, on press, and this trigger is going to do an API request. We're going to select our to-do API over here, and we need a delete endpoint. Unfortunately, we don't have a delete endpoint. We're going to say new endpoint, say delete task. Method is going to be delete. Role is delete. Object type is to do. Paths and parameters, tasks, and then the task that we're going to be deleting, ID. And let's say we want to delete 7, which is that last task that we've created recently. There's not going to be any body. Headers is going to be set to defaults. And for test, let's go see if it works. For test, and 200 OK, this should have been deleted. And so if we go back to our data, click on data, we do not have a task with an ID of 7. So this works. Click on save, click on done, and now we can wire this up. So icon button is set, click on delete, and now we need to make sure that the ID is set correctly. Click on this, scroll down. You want to make sure that you have ID set. And now this is wired correctly. Okay, so now I can start testing it. I can click on this and it's gone. And as you can see, it automatically refreshed. I can click here. Task 5 is done. Task 5 is deleted. It automatically refreshed. Click here. Look at our data. And guess what? We only have 4 tasks, which is exactly what we're seeing here. We can create a new task 5, add task. And that is the task right there. New task 6, add 6. And that is the task right there. Now, you can also test your app on your device using something called live preview. So if you click this button right here, you're going to be given this QR code that you need to scan with your app. But before you can do so, you want to download Draftbit for iOS or Android. Now, I already have the app downloaded here. So all I need to do is click on Scan Project, scan this right here, and my app should load on my phone now. And as you can see, I'm seeing the app in real time on my phone. So here I can click on different icons here. I can click this, click that, and let's see if the data is updated. Go back here, click on data, and as you can see, this was updated right here, so it works in real time. I can also create a new task, so I can type new, add task, and there's the task being created right there, and the task was also created here on my preview on my laptop right here. So this is a nice feature that allows you to see your app in real time, exactly how your users are going to see it when you launch the app. And so that is a quick to-do app demo with Draftbit, just to give you a general sense of what it's like to build an app with this no-code tool builder. I do plan on making a more comprehensive tutorial where I'm going to be building a more complex app. If you want to see that kind of tutorial, leave a comment below and definitely like this video. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video and you're serious about your no-code development, then you definitely need to check out our amazing Patreon community and become a member, because when you join our amazing Patreon community, not only will you get access to all the no-code apps that I built on this channel, you're also going to get access to this app right here, and you're going to get access to more content such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, as well as our Patreon supported masterclass series where I do deep dives on specific topics that the community votes on. Plus, by joining our Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is greatly appreciated. And so if all of this sounds like something you might be interested in, then you should definitely check out our Patreon community via the link below and consider becoming a member.